All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, John Henry Parker. John Henry, welcome.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
John Henry is a former peacetime Marine whose father was a Marine Korean War veteran and Air Force reconnaissance photographer in Vietnam. John Henry authored and published the book, Transitioning Veterans, How We Get in Our Own Way and What to Do About It. The book is based on his personal experiences with transitioning at-risk veterans, their families, and also his son, Danny, Purple Heart recipient, combat veteran of 2 deployments to Afghanistan with the Army 10th Mountain Division. Danny was killed in an excessive speed-related motorcycle accident after completing his military service. His most recent book, titled Be the Dawn in the Darkness, John Henry builds a case for how trauma informs and provisions us to live a better life. This is a story of personal transformation that unfolds from childhood through his teenage years, the military, and throughout his adult life. Ultimately, it's about finding joy and fulfillment in the realization that we deserve to live a fulfilling life and that we each deserve to be happy. Yes, please. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
It's really awesome. I've been following your work for a good long time, so it's kind of a personal thrill to just finally be able to sit down and talk about some things.
Appreciate that. So before we get going here, John Henry, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I was born on an Air Force base, Sumter, South Carolina, and I was raised in Southwest Phoenix. And currently I reside just outside of Las Vegas.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dive in here. How the heck did this start for you?
Meaning, that's a really interesting question. How did this start? Meaning,
how is it that you and I are sitting here today talking? Why?
Well, it's something I never thought I would do. Because I started writing therapeutically years ago just to kind of exercise some of the trauma and get it out so I could look at it. I've been through a lot of experiential retreats, a lot of transformational retreats, a lot of certifications, all kinds of things that kept a lot of shadow work, a lot of things that were helping me cull out what was unresolved. And so I started writing therapeutically only to discover that there was a theme. And then when I was really exposed more deeply to Joseph Campbell's work, The Hero's Journey, I took the arc of The Hero's Journey in a graphic and I laid out my life, and that turned into my table of contents, and I started applying this therapeutic writing for a purpose now, to really kind of look at my life I saved all the really bad things for last. But when I got it done, and I wrote it under my grandfather's name because it was never supposed to see the light of day. And then when I did write it, I thought, I'm going to put it out, let the work speak for itself. And I put under my name, J.H. Parker, but I didn't think I would have to do any interviews or talk about it. I'm like, people are going to, if they like it, they like it. If it helps people, it helps people. But I really don't want to talk about it. I really don't want to be out there in the public. And here I am talking to you. Like, this is what it takes to. I had to really look at, do I really want this to help people? If so, I've got to go first. I got to get uncomfortable. Yeah. And this is why I'm here.
All right. So you leaped over a lot of stuff, but so what was going on for you such that, I mean, obviously you were going through a lot. What were you going through? What was happening?
Well, unresolved trauma. Like when I discovered the Adverse Childhood Experiences survey, it really blew me away because out of the 10 questions, I'm a 10. And when I look back at all my writing, there was no mystery about like how severe and how challenging it was. But I really was just a kid running as fast away as I could from my neighborhood and from my experiences, trying to make it in the world, trying to emulate other people and trying to be like other people who were successful, and nobody would ever, in their wildest imagination, see me as being successful when I was in my teenage years and my young adult years. So I look back now.
Just to give us some context, we talk, and we don't have to get into details, but for just some context, we're talking about a lot of stuff going on at home that you need. I grew up in
an environment where there's a really violent, raging, alcoholic combat veteran who was beating and terrorizing everybody all the time, nonstop. It was just a terrible environment. And then outside the home, there was gangs and violence and predators who were waiting for me to come outside and go to the store. Jeez. And so a lot of violence, a lot of getting beat up by groups of guys on a regular basis, and then deciding I'm going to go in the military. I'm not going to have this. I'm going to have anybody mess with me again. And then going in the Marines, and then, getting some scoop up some more trauma, right? And then coming home, got a couple of bad, more grief and loss of others, so that really was the upbringing, that the first part of my life. And then it took an upward trajectory into personal development, transformational development. It was what really saved my life, because I wasn't going to counseling. This wasn't going to happen.
How did you get through those younger years? How did you survive those younger years?
I'll tell you, my great aunt Gladys, she didn't save my life, but she provisioned me to save my own life. Like I say right in the front of the book, it only takes one healthy adult of great character to shape the life of a child forever. Wow. And she provisioned me with some really important things to live my life by, that I'll just share a couple of them if you don't mind.
Yes, of course. I'm like, what are these things?
Yeah. So one of the biggest one is she tried to tell me that God is love and that I was going to find my purpose someday. And after she explained to me, every religion that she's looked at, they all have a common principle. If you lay out and get rid of all the extreme aspects, every faith of every part of the world, God is love. If you understand that, you can get along with anybody from any faith. So I thought that was great advice. But then she asked me, do you think God is love? And I thought about it. I couldn't answer it. But when I did, I finally said, it may be true for you, but it's not true for me. Because if God is love, why are all these bad things happening to me? Mm-hmm. And she said, ultimately, you're going to discover this for yourself someday, and you're going to find your purpose. Because I told her I was too young to have a purpose at that time. She said, you're probably right. So then throughout my life, all these catastrophic things happened, but every time I was about to get beat up, just before it impacted, like, here it goes, I would ask myself, if God is love, why is this happening to me? Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you, I have lost count of how many times I've asked myself that question in really bad situations. But I didn't find joy until I was 53. Not one ounce of joy in my life. And but when I did, I realized in a lightning bolt that the reason for my suffering, all these bad things, was so I could be given the gift of empathy. I could be given the gift of empathy to understand the pain of others. So for me, that really made it worth everything.
Wow. I really appreciate you sharing that. That's pretty intense. A lot of stuff, to hear you say that you hadn't experienced a bit of joy throughout that whole time, throughout your major portion of your life.
Right.
My God. So your aunt, what was her name again?
Gladys. We called her Glad.
and glad.
The world needs more glad. I can tell you that.
The world needs more glad. That's so amazing, man, that you had that person in your life. How do you, so you go through the military, and at what point, walk us through, how did this shift occur where you're like, okay, I need to get on this. Something's got to shift.
So yet another message from Glad. She said, pay attention to the messengers that you meet seemingly by chance, because they're typically here to teach you the most. So I kept bumping into messengers all the time because I was curious and I recognized something interesting was happening here. And one messenger, just before I got out of the Marine Corps, was a warrant officer. And I had a really bad rage problem. I got in a lot of trouble, more than most anybody I've ever met, growing up and in the military, because of this unresolved rage towards my dad, But I met this warrant officer in a USO 2 weeks before I got out of the Marine Corps, and it was a 5-minute conversation that changed. It just impacted the trajectory of my life completely, and it still does. He asked me if he'd give me some advice, and long story short, I said yes, and he said, instead of sitting here and drinking beer and getting loud with my buddies, if I were you, I'd go to the closest bookstore. I'd go to the self-help section, not the psychology section. Go to the self-help section, and I'd find 2 or 3 books that jump off the shelf. And I'm not going to tell you which ones to get, but find something that jumps off the shelf at you and start reading about who you're becoming. Because, like I said, in the Marines, you just don't go get help. You just don't ask for it. It's not a good idea. And even though they say it's okay, it's still not okay because of your ethos, right? And you don't want to have anything in your medical records that could, for a lot of guys, it's about, or gals and guys, it's, don't want anything to risk a security clearance or a promotion because they went to see somebody, whereas the next person didn't.
Right. So
I picked up off the shelf that day, The Magic of Thinking Big by Schwartz, because that just sounded awesome. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. That's awesome as well. I just thought that was a great title. And then of all things, Psychocybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, where he was a plastic surgeon who would make people beautiful, but they couldn't see it. Mm-hmm. Right. And here I am in this impeccable Marine Corps uniform, but I'm really broken and damaged inside. And I said, wow, I got to get this. So that interrupted the trajectory of my life into an aspirational trajectory that I never looked back. And when I say I didn't have any joy, I had a lot of satisfaction from growing and learning because of that 5-minute conversation. And I never saw the guy again.
What do you think allowed you to take that in that moment?
Because when you're getting out of the military, you have a big ego and people try to give you advice and you're like, thank you very much, sir. Yes, ma'am. Okay. I got this. Mm-hmm. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to be successful, whatever I set my mind to, kind of thinking. And everybody typically has to run into the brick wall themselves. What made it possible is because I was scared to death inside. I just was really good about not showing it. I had a lot of practice about not showing I'm afraid, but all of us were kind of freaked out. Like, what are we going to do? Who are we? I can carry big, heavy packs. I can parachute out of helicopters at night, and I can put a round down range, but I'm going to be a firefighter, I'm going to be a prison guard, or I'm going to be a cop. Right. And I didn't want to be either of those. So it hit me because it was one of those messengers that Glad told me to look out for.
So how did things unfold after that for you?
It was tough. Transitioning out of the military was tough because all I knew was when I just galvanized this ego that I had crafted and curated, So I was lost for about 6 years, and then I got into business development. And long story short, a book I picked up was from Tom Hopkins, who was a sales trainer from way back. And then, so I went to work for Tom Hopkins for about 3.5 years. And then I went to work for Jim Rohn, who was Tony Robbins' first mentor for a couple of years. Then I went to work for Tony Robbins for a few years. And just really, I thought to myself, I don't want to learn this. I want to immerse myself in this work. And so that's been my whole thing, is just emulating an immersion into personal development. And then I became a behavioral assessment analyst. I've been doing that for 35 years. I got into the transformational development work with a lot of really great leaders, thought leaders, and went to work for them, with them. So my whole strategy was about immersion, just getting into my bones. And it really helped me build a life.
How does one get to work for Jim Rohn and then get to work for Tony Robbins? I mean, come on.
I tell you what, it started by going to work for the sales training organization. I called this guy, Ron Marks, and I'm like, I just read the book. I just went to a seminar. I'm like, I got to come work for you. Like, everybody says that we're not hiring. Right. And I called this guy for like 3 months and, not hiring. So finally I just said, okay, so we need to meet. So that way, when you are hiring, you'll know who to call. And he says, oh, okay. Now when can you get into my schedule? Because he wanted me to close him. He wanted me to give him a reason to see me, not just, I want a job.
Right.
And he gave me my start, and he's just a great guy. And so getting 3.5 years of understanding the sales training seminar, personal development field. Then I went to my first Tony Robbins seminar, and I realized how powerful that experience was for me. And I'd been listening to Jim Rohn for years, working for Tom Hopkins. I was out driving around the country, and I'd be going through his cassette albums like 6 or 7 times. So he really helped me build a philosophy of life that was really impenetrable. It was really what I needed. I never had a lot of fatherly advice, but he sure gives it, right? And then I got to work into being a field sales rep for Tony for a couple of years. And
how old are you at this point?
Oh, I'm 26 to 30.
Okay. What was it like when you began to realize that the severity of what you had gone through as a kid? When that began to rear its head in a sense, and you became conscious of that.
That's the funny thing about a couple of things with trauma is I never thought I was bullied. I was terrorized. Like, I was like severely terrorized. So I looked at bullying as, sorry, you're getting picked on, and so I didn't realize I was in my 40s, really came to a realization that I'd been bullied really bad. I don't know. That's why the subtitle of my book is what it is: The Relentless Pursuit of Becoming Who We Are Meant to Be. So the title is Be the Dawn in the Darkness, which is a term that Glad used throughout my life. Like, she was the dawn in my darkness, and I needed to be the dawn in the darkness for my son. So it was a term, a very intentional title. But the subtitle is what I really developed myself, which is The Relentless Pursuit of Becoming Who We Are Meant to Be. That sums it up. It's a relentless pursuit. Just don't quit. And I just have had lots of opportunities to quit in my life, and I just have not submitted. And I'm a lot easier going now, but it took that kind of fortitude to survive.
So you were talking about a time when you were 26 to 30. At what point did you get married and have your son?
Well, that's another story, man. I didn't even meet my son until he was 8.5. And I write about this in my book. I remember dropping his mom off 10 years prior at her grandparents' house. And then, long story short, he was adopted by his great grandparents, 3 months old. And so I was in the military. And so they made my mother and father and I agreed not to be in touch with them ever. And these are the terms of the adoption. And I was going in the military, and my mom had really bad Parkinson's. So they weren't in a position, otherwise they would have adopted him. But I also didn't want him being around my dad. So I was really kind of thankful that the his great grandparents adopted him. So I had to go door to door in a neighborhood that I remember to find the house that he lived at. And that's how I met my son. So I'm not sure how old I was at the time. But it is an incredible experience to be able to get to know him and then to build a life together.
And do you feel comfortable sharing what happened?
Yeah.
To whatever extent you do. And of course, we don't have to.
Yeah. Well, he, like me, the military was the only choice. He was raised just a few miles from where I was, in a really bad neighborhood, and he was getting lots of trouble. So he was able to get into the Army, and he found his calling, And then in July of 2001, he called me and said, "Should I reenlist?" I'm like, "I don't know, maybe, maybe not." But he decided to. And then a month later, it's 9/11. And then by October 15th, he's in Uzbekistan, So he did 9 years in the military, and a lot of really bad things happened, and long story short, when he got out, he had he was going to school to get his master's in social work to become a counselor for veterans. He thought he could do a better job than a lot of people that non-veterans that he was, trying to, he was seeing at the time. And, but he needed adrenaline to kind of deal with his symptoms of PTSD. And he got in a motorcycle accident one night, just doing like 120 miles an hour down an unlit road at midnight. Outside, it was near Fort Drum, New York. And that was it. I mean, and he wasn't suicidal. He would get his adrenaline rush and he'd go home and go to sleep. It was just a kind of a bad habit. And a lot of vets get wiped out like that.
Were you married at the time?
No, I had a long-standing girlfriend at the time. I think actually, no, I wasn't married. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously, tragic. How do you move forward after that? I mean, it sounds like such a trite question, but I mean, it's arguably the person's worst nightmare.
Well, I became the wounded healer, literally. I discovered that if I didn't move my pain, it was going to eat me alive. And so I had a dark cave that I hung out with. It was wet. It was cold. It was mine. I was fine. I was going to be fine. But I started adopting at-risk veterans. I guess in the time, it's like I couldn't save Danny, but I could certainly help save others, So I did that for 10 years. I was really just immersed in just going out and working with at-risk combat vets and just being with them and showing up. Like another thing.
In what capacity? Where were you doing this?
All over the country. I was doing a lot of things over the phone. I was going and meeting with vets, their families. I would do meetings at an American Legion every week where families would come in and talk about transition, talk about their kids being deployed, stuff like that. And, since I understood how to present, I understood personal development really, really well. I have all these tools and this arsenal of tools that I developed for myself over the years that I was calling upon. But I just went into like this odyssey. I was kind of prepared before my son died because in 2003, he called me from Afghanistan from a satellite phone. I hadn't heard from him in about 5 months. And he said, "I'm too effed up to come home. I just don't want to come home." So that launched me into this odyssey of transition and looking for resources, looking for ways to deal with trauma and, substance abuse and all these things that the veterans are so caught up in. So I had good number of years of preparation. So when he died, I had all these tools and I just started adopting veterans, and I still know all of them to this day. And I haven't lost any of them, but they're really doing well. But I needed to move my pain. And even though it wasn't completely a clean exchange, I needed something for me. It helped me mature in my grief and my loss to where now I'm no longer the wounded healer whatsoever. Like I know how to be in someone's life and participate. And it comes back down to yet another nugget from Glad. And she said that, she taught me about the law of reciprocity. Number one, show up, because not very many people do.
Mm-hmm.
Keep showing up. Number two, do what you say you're going to do. If you don't do what you say you're going to do with a veteran, they'll dismiss you immediately, right? And so number three is give a shit, or don't help them. Like really, really care about the person's outcomes, or just nicely or tactfully decide not to do it. And then number four is ask nothing in return. So about 10 years, I was getting something for myself in return, but it was worth it because I needed to do it. And now I'm matured in my grief. And it's a really interesting confliction, because I wouldn't have become the person I had become without the impact of the loss of Danny.
The way you talk about Gladys, I mean, first of all, she sounds incredible. She sounds like that wise figure in that Star Wars, she's one of those wise people. And the way you laid out her little gold nugget sounds like the Book of Four Agreements, whatever that is.
Oh yeah. Just like that.
But I mean, John, man, you are just so friggin' incredible and inspiring. What do you think? What do you know? What do you feel it is about you that has, and you probably said this the past 40 minutes, but if you can articulate it in a different way, what do you feel it is about you that you're able to transfer to these people you help and work with?
Oh man, I guess I say it though often. I've been humbled really hard. Like that's probably the most important thing. Is that I'm not trying to teach anybody anything, and that's really what I'm also really clear about. Teachers fall from the pedestals we put them on. So I don't want to be seen as a teacher. Period. I'm in this. Like every day, I get triggered just like everybody else. But I've developed and learned some resources to help me self-regulate, that are real and they're tangible and they help, and so that's what I write about. And I write about all these 30 years of working with at-risk veterans and traumatized people and the field of personal development. I enjoy writing about the experiences. It's not a personal development book that's going to teach you how to live your life. There's no 7 steps to anything. What I'm looking at is people like learning vicariously and viscerally through story, through real experiences that then allow you to grow and learn to find the next experience. And everybody's on a hero's journey. So I think this is very relatable in that way, that I'm not setting it up to teach. I don't want to do consulting. I don't want to do speaking engagements. I'm not looking for a gig. I'm doing this because this was cathartic for me. And I think encouraging people to do some therapeutic writing might be a great outcome for the most part. But also, I'll give you one last nugget from Glad that shows up more than often, is she helped me make an agreement when I was like 7 years old, 8 years old, where, she knew how violent my dad was. And she used to come live with us from Canada for 2 months a year during Thanksgiving and January, so she could get out of the cold, and she would live with us. And I'd sit at her feet for like 2-3 hours every morning, and we'd talk. So she made me make an agreement with her that I'd never broken. Like I was entrusted with this agreement, which was that I would never. If my father, I would lived in fear of my father, and that but when I was old enough, I would be an adult a lot longer than I was going to be a kid. And someday I would make my own choices. And if I ever had a family, the promise was that I would never hit my children in anger and never have them live in fear of me. And I never broke that. And I made that with my son when I met him for the first couple of months after getting to know him when he was 8 years old, 8.5, and we never broke it. So probably the most important accomplishment of my life is that we broke the chain of violence from the men on my father's side of the family. It's just what happens. It's terrible violence. So we never did that. And so that had an impact.
That's incredible. As we kind of wind down here, I want to ask you kind of a general question about the state of the veterans making transition. I mean, to me, this story, the situation is so tragic. It just seems to be going on and on and on. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel in terms of how we as a society are welcoming back and helping transition back these veterans?
If I was to say just one major point briefly, it would be identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. We get this galvanized into us. We have an identity, we have a daily mission, we have meaning and purpose. And then when we get out, we have nothing. And every veteran is unprepared for the realization that they have to reinvent themselves. And they do not do a good job enough of transitioning people out of the military. They do an incredible job building up this professional warfighter, but they have a transition assistance program called TAPS. But my wish is that they would really hit on identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. You got to reinvent yourself. Who are you? Mm-hmm. You got to give yourself a daily mission. You got to find something greater than yourself that you can focus on, like Danny, becoming a counselor. A new identity, being a counselor. The new mission was get yourself in possession of all the details from the colleges and your military benefits. Okay. So we use these terms, identity, mission, meaning, and purpose. If more families would be able to, and this is really, I can keep plugging my book here, but this is all in the book.
Well, that's what this is about.
How
that's
this
why
works.
You're here to talk about your book. There's no shame in that.
But yeah, this is a shameless plug because there's a methodology, there's a process that families need to learn how to have. They need to learn to understand how to have a conversation with their loved ones and their veterans, and this kind of gives you a roadmap.
And that book is called "Be the Dawn in the Darkness." Where can people get that book?
Well, you can get it by going to harvestingwisdom.com. Okay. Obviously, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and lots of different places. But if you go to Amazon.com, there's links right there where you can pick it up from lots of different places. And there's an audiobook too, which I really, really like. We got an incredible narrator, storyteller named Dan Warren. And he just does a great job. I think it would be wonderfully read.
Wow. Well, John Henry, man, you are one impressive and inspiring person, I've got to say, and I really appreciate you coming on here. You're welcome. I appreciate you coming on here and sharing your story. I know it's not easy, but I truly believe that there are a lot of people out there who are going to be inspired by you and the work you do. And I'd love to have you back. Love to have you back on the show.
I would really enjoy that, and thank you so much. You've made this really easy.
I appreciate that. So the best way for people to get in contact with you is at harvestingwisdom.com?
Correct.
Okay. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page at thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. All right, sir. We'll talk. Take care.
Thank you.